Let's start with Here. Here is directed by Robert Zemeckis, who co-wrote the script with Eric Roth. Heard of him? 6-time Academy Award nominated screenwriter of Forrest Gump, The Insider, Munich, Benjamin Button, A Star is Born, Dune, among several other movies.
He's good at writing movies.
He's very good at writing movies. It is based on the graphic novel Here by Richard McGuire. The DP is frequent Zemeckis collaborator Don Burgess, and the movie stars Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, completing the Forrest Gump reunion, plus Paul Bettany, Kelly Riley, and others. This innovative movie uses a stationary camera to depict the lives, loves, and losses of the humans and dinosaurs.
Thank you.
Who occupy the same plot of land in New Jersey over the course of the last million or so years. So you've got the dinosaurs, you've got an indigenous family, you've got a colonial family who's related to Benjamin Franklin. And you see Benjamin Franklin at one point.
Yes, you do. He's going over for a visit. Ben Franklin
lived
across.
My boy!
It's the street in New Jersey. Yeah, Ben Franklin lived across the street or something.
My boy.
Yeah. Okay, Ben Franklin. Go through all the people
a turn of the century family who's into aviation and dies of the Spanish flu or something.
That's exactly
You've got the
right.
bohemian Roaring Twenties couple who invent the Lazy Boy recliner.
Yes. No spoiler. I thought we were doing no spoilers.
I'm spoiling
You piece of
everything.
shit.
I already gave the disclaimer. I can do whatever I want. You get none of this is. You never go, oh my God.
That's supposed to be the whole
There's
thing.
never
though.
the sensation of like a twist is happening in this movie, so don't worry about it. And then, of course, you get your main characters, the Young family, who buy the house after World War II thanks to the GI Bill. And then occupy, thanks to the GI Bill and their own whiteness, and then they occupy it for the next 70 or so years as Paul Bettany hands it over to his son Tom Hanks, and they raise their respective families in this house. And then finally, you have a contemporary family who occupies the house during COVID years.
After Hanks
sells it. The movie is non-linear. It jumps back and forth between these various timelines, and the camera stays in place the entire freaking time, minus the last 30 seconds or so.
Fucking spoiler alert for Here.
Oh, I'm sorry. They finally moved the fucking
That's
camera.
like the whole fucking thing.
Joe, what'd you think of Here?
Here was the best movie of what I think of Here.
What'd you think of Here?
Yeah. Here is, I love watching our wonderful auteurs age and watching all the different ways.
Description
Hold on.
of Zemeckis.
All of our.
He shook.
Yeah, how dare you? I know. Zemeckis is one of Hollywood's biggest filmmakers.
Okay, great. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The guy's made so many classic Hollywood pictures. Okay? He's had a rough road, and now he's
freaking James Cameron. He's he's a massive
he makes
cultural
massive,
force of a
popular,
filmmaker.
films that have reverberated through generations of Americans. In Here, it's fun to watch all of our old filmmakers grow old and be most of them, the good ones, the ones that were really in it to win it the whole entire time, have developed their craft and become more and more of themselves and refine more and more of what they do. Like from, Coppola and Megalopolis, that's so Coppola, right? My God. Or, late Weissman. You're like, oh, that's so fucking Weissman. Late Scorsese, how his attitudes towards violence have shifted and what he depicts in Killers of the Flower Moon. It's amazing to watch all these old filmmakers grow up, and they become more and more themselves. Well, Here is the most Zemeckis I've ever seen in my life. It was like a Zemeckis fucking hurricane. It's the most...
Only Zemeckis could have made this movie, I'll say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a formally ambitious and technically... grandiose experiment that's actually kind of fucking thrilling and exciting and brilliant. All Zemeckis' films are this weird pairing of technological cinematech advancements paired with stories that succeed to varying degrees. And once again, we see him here at the end of his days incorporating so much motion capture and a little sprinklings of AI and all of this sort of stuff in this really formalistically rigid and interesting and could have been beautiful movie. The problem with a majority of his films. The content is for idiots. the content is for children. And then when he makes children movies, they're like, that was good. And he makes adult movies. You're like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? It's it's borderline creepy how sweet this fucker is. And here is him at his like most saccharine. But also here has this hateful little twist in it, which is only when Robin Wright at the end of her life is riddled with dementia is she able to even begin to utter the words, I like being in this house. I love it here. Because all the movie is, and maybe Zemeckis would agree, it's like a very beautiful Norman Rockwell look at a collection of like tremendous disappointments and how like your life just becomes kind of this like horrible collection of disappointments that all kind of take place very specifically on private property. Weird movie. I had a lot of fun. I went with Brett and our friend Gabriel. We all like laughed and like nudged each other because Zemeckis is so silly. This movie cuts to Native Americans, but all the Native Americans do is like have tender moments in the moonlight. It's like so
all they do is
offensive.
all they do is like cultural rituals that Zemeckis found out about from a documentary.
So
or something.
silly. Oh, and then later on, like at one point, with like a guy knocks on the door or something. And he's like, "Hi, can I come in your house? Like, can I go in the backyard and dig up ancient Native American necklaces I know are back there?" And like, wow, that's
and it amounts to nothing.
Crazy.
It amounts to nothing.
There's that. That's stupid. There's a lot of moments from Boomer history, like greatest hits, filtering in and out throughout the film. Like, there's the Beatles.
I cannot believe we did not get Kennedy assassination.
Or moon landing.
I leaned over, or moon landing.
He picks and chooses like some odd spots.
I leaned over to you and I was like, I can't wait. I'm going to stand up and cheer when we get to Kennedy assassination. And it never happened.
Yeah. And I think that most unfortunately, tonally, like if this movie's goal was to move you, which it certainly was, which is the goal of all of his manipulative, childish movies, is stunted by some silliness, like with the like ancient Native American people's tenderness moments, stupid, bookended by the modern black family that's struggling through COVID, who gives this family gets very limited screen time. Something that happens during the only thing that really happens to
they
this
get
family,
one scene. Let's be clear.
One scene.
Like if you take out the scene where they're like, this is our new house, and the scene where they're like, well, time to sell this house. If you take out those two scenes, they get one
Everybody
scene.
else gets a lot of scenes.
They get one scene.
Unfortunately, and tonally devastating to the larger project of here, this poor black family, the only insight into their lives we get is the father giving the son the famous talk about law enforcement.
What to do if you get pulled over
so
by the cops.
It's very
and
like
it's so Zemeckis.
It's very like
it's so
white liberal,
boomer
like,
liberal.
See,
bullshit.
I listened,
yes.
and now it's reflected in my film here. Also, their maid dies of COVID, and it's very funny because like 1 second she can't smell, and then the next second it like cuts to someone walking in and being like, Rosa died.
It's the kind of scene, in addition to the scene of the indigenous family that we sort of cut to occasionally. It's as though like Zemeckis filmed the scene, and then they gave him like a giant like crayon, and he like checked a giant box and then moved on. It is the most like white boomer liberal box checking you've ever seen in your entire life. It's like it's him going like, I did it right, like I did it right, like I've like it's not all white people, right? Good, right?
It was tough. It was tough.
It's wild.
It was really tough. And then, but overall, besides like many unfortunate moments and some bizarre choices, I did find it formally exciting, and I like that this guy who, whether or not I like his films, like I understand that he's very good at making movies and he loves them very much. I did like just being like, oh, this guy, he's not some fucking hack. Like Zemeckis never gave up on changing, iterating, evolving, and trying things. And here he is in his 70s, trying something that is never going to work and having the fucking chutzpah to get the financing for it. Like in this later like age, like I respect here. I think here's a bad movie. I did like tear up like 2 or 3 times. These days, if you show a father and mom or like parents enjoying their children, like you bet I'm going to cry.
I'm done.
And the kid's like laughing and running around a living room. Oh, I'm going to cry. But that's not here doesn't get like points because I'm a sap.
That's because we're hovering on the edge of like emotional instability at all times.
We just love our children and they make us happy. But the movie is I appreciate its ambitions, and it's cool that our great filmmakers never, even in like their 70s, 80s, and 90s, like they're not on a beach. They're like still thinking about the fucking craft, trying to push themselves. At 75, Zemeckis, God bless.
Yeah. No, this is more like Megalopolis than it is whatever like phoned in bullshit, you might see from a less committed,
Guy
director.
Exactly.
The effort is very apparent. I'll put it there. There's definitely effort that was put behind this movie. I do think ultimately, like you said, I think you gave a great summary of it. It has the Forrest Gump disease where it's trying to be about everything and ultimately has very little to say about anything that's relevant to anybody. At the same time that it's trying to capture the entire scope of human history in one movie. We do see the passage of time, the movement of history, but you're given very little to think about. And I would say even worse for this movie, you're given very little to feel about. Even despite these little movies that caught us off guard and with our personal vulnerabilities, I didn't care about anybody in this movie. I mean, the families and the couples who occupy this house are boring and their lives are uneventful. And there are times, I think, where Zemeckis leans into the monotony and the dull tragedies of their existence and is trying to do a kind of death of a salesman kitchen sink thing. The problem is the scenes are so fast. You can't do Death of a Salesman if you're constantly fucking doing this. The scenes are like micro scenes. And I'm like, why? You're not moving the camera. Let these people fucking act for 5 minutes before you cut to something else. But he's not able to like turn the movie on itself and make a point of the monotony because he never lets the monotony sit there long enough to become the point. He's constantly cutting to something else. And it also is very, I mean, it's the Death of a Salesman thing too is reflected in the structure and look of the movie, which, I mean, I've never seen a movie that felt more like a community theater play than here. I mean, because of the way the camera is done, characters literally have to like come up stage to get their close-ups. So you have this sense of like, oh, he's coming up stage. It's like everything feels very theatrical and very much like you're at a play. But because, again, Zemeckis is so frantic to get from one micro vignette to the next, the characters are never given time to develop in relationship to each other, and the performances constantly have to like start over, and they never get going in any meaningful way. And the performances of Hanks and Robin Wright are obviously hampered by the fucking de-aging technology, which made Hanks look like he's, goes to the Ben Platt High School from Dear Evan Hansen, the way they had him looking in this movie. And I was really, the one thing that really disappointed me though is like, because we went back and watched a lot of Zemeckis movies this week to do our top 5. Normally Zemeckis can be counted on at the very least for one like breathtaking how did he do it fucking set piece.
Absolutely.
Whether it's the plane crashes in Castaway and Flight, the last 30 minits of What Lies Beneath, that famous mirror shot in Contact of Jenna Malone coming up the stairs. For all his sort of misses and highs and lows, you can always like count on Zemeckis for just like one fucking mind-blowing
The man
sequence.
knows what he's doing.
Yeah. And in here, that moment never came. I thought the device of the stationary camera really just constantly made me aware of its limitations. It was the kind of thing where it's like, and look, I love when like a limitation becomes a strength. I love it. I think that's the nature of filmmaking. That's the challenge of filmmaking, is turning limitations into strengths. But to me, I was just constantly reminded of the limitations of this decision and not like the hidden potentials of it. And everything from the blocking to the production design to the performances felt artificial. It felt unnecessarily limited by the stationary camera. And even worse than the camera to me was the editing. Zemeckis uses this like collage technique to switch between the timelines, where constantly these like little squares and rectangles would sort of block out the transitions, where like, you're in the 1950s era, but then like a little square appears and you see back into the dinosaur period, and another little square over here and you see the roaring 20s, and then all the squares disappear and then you go into the present day. But like the square and rectangle things felt like a cheap iMovie transition effect. It did not feel on par with like Zemeckis level filmmaking or Zemeckis level technique. It just looked ugly and meaningless and automated, and it didn't allow for any interesting interplay between the timelines, which should have been a major component of this movie. Instead, these transitions just felt sort of arbitrary and uninspired. It's like, are you just like spinning a wheel as to where we go next? Like, there's no interplay between anything.
I agree with you. I thought that I thought it was effective and cool in the fixed perspective and the moving of the squares in and out and showing different slices of time. So you're sitting in one age, but then the TV is cut out of a different TV of a different age showing a different thing.
Yeah.
And I actually thought that was kind of subtly brilliant, and I'm sure incredibly difficult to actually pull off to do it. But Brett, I agree with you 100% that, like, why didn't that make something emotionally awesome through time or something? It didn't. It was cool, and it didn't pay off.
It did not pay off.
Yeah.
It did not pay
Yeah.
off. My biggest issue with the movie, though, and you've talked about this, but let me get my rocks off too on this, is the biggest issue with the movie is this rich white boomer liberalism that just wafts off of every frame like a fucking stench. This movie has Beverly Hills Fundraiser written all over it. This movie has been in Gavin Newsom's wine cellar on multiple occasions. This movie gets investment advice, French Laundry. This movie gets investment advice from Nancy Pelosi on a private text thread. This fucking movie, Joe, chose one of the most fraught concepts in American society, housing, as its centerpiece, right? Mm-hmm. And pretends that housing is as benign and apolitical a concept as a fucking sandwich. It's ridiculous. When the scene where, like, Paul Bettany just waltzes in and buys the most gorgeous house you've ever seen with the GI Bill, and there's no acknowledgement of, like, redlining, and not everyone that fought in World War II could buy houses like this, et cetera, is just sort of like silly and devaluing to the project of the movie. This movie seems to have no interest in its own topic, which is a shame because you could tell a fascinating story of American history by just focusing on one house and the various sort of historical contexts and ownership and etc. You could tell a fascinating story of American history using this device, but first you have to be aware of and interested in that history. I'm sure Robert Zemeckis has heard of redlining and has heard and knows the history of housing and knows these issues. I don't know why they weren't used more constructively to actually tell the story of America in this movie, and instead we get this incredibly whitewashed version of American history with these very, very silly attempts at sort of diversity with characters that are given no... I mean, the non-white characters in this movie, as you said, have no agency. They are props. They are used to check boxes and to make arguments, but they are not treated as human beings in the same way that Paul Bettany and Tom Hanks and Robin Wright are treated as human beings.
I mean, that is assuredly true.
This is it's cringeworthy boomer liberalism at its highest point, and here will not be making my list of the top 5 Robert Zemeckis movies.
No,
which we'll get to in the second hour.
No,